The day is a panel discussion, and it will focus on breaking down the journey towards smart labs of the future. Now, this discussion will examine why, how, and the steps required for the successful digitalization and technology-driven optimization of the lab environment. So the panelists will explore the key benefits, the potential challenges, and how to formulate the strategy for a successful digital transition. It goes without saying, very excited to have everyone here today, and we hope you find it a really interesting discussion. So I'd like to welcome the following panelists. First, we have Andrea Stein, who is Manager Digital Solutions for Roche Pharmaceuticals. Robin Brower, Digital Lab Capability Leader, R&D IT for AstraZeneca. And finally, our moderator, Nick Patterson, who is Head of Lab Automation for Automata. So before we start, just like to take a quick minute just to remind attendees that you've all joined in listen-only mode, so that means that you are muted. But as I mentioned before, for the purpose of people that didn't pick up on that or wasn't in the original session, there are various areas within the system that I would encourage you to use. There's a section for Q&A. So if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, there is various tabs, one of which is Q&A. And if you just drop your questions in that area, what we'll do is we'll address those questions towards the back end of it. So that's it from me, really. So to kick things off, I'll hand you over to the moderator for the session. Pattinson.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks for having us, and thanks a lot for joining me, Andy and Robin. Looking forward to the conversation. So maybe we just get straight into it, given the intros we've already had. And I think like the only place to really start this conversation is from the simple question of why bother, right? Like why bother with, and I think we can focus on that digital transformation side. What's in it for companies that go down that route? Robin, I don't know if you want to start.
Sorry. So just a quick intro. Robin Brouwer, based in Gothenburg, and we have 3 R&D sites globally. I'm based in one of those R&D sites and accountable for our labs globally. And to answer your question just very shortly on a very high level, for us, it's all about accelerating and innovative science. So more productivity, more efficiency. But then also the other aspect is being a great place to work, including sustainability, attracting the right talents in the labs. And we believe that digitization plays a key role in both of those aspects. So that's me.
Yeah, then maybe to me, Andrea Steinle. I'm working for Roche since 2005, mainly always in the lab space around our instruments and systems, from the pH meter to the mass spectrometry, but also from the LIMS to the ELN. And a few years before, I joined our R&D departments, and I'm focused in the last year about digital transformation and more on the transformation part. So digitalization is the one thing, but how you can transform a whole ocean with a long history, with maybe not a digital mindset. And in this position, I have the possibility to write our digital transformation strategy for Europe. And now we follow this strategy and see a little bit where the adjustments needed, and also what is possible and what is impossible. Because something is not on the market, what we believe, what you see in few slides and so on. Yeah. And I think our biggest challenge is really the mindset and the speed, how we can accelerate what you're doing, because the time is a little bit over where you stay 10 years with the LIMS and have no change in this, right? So
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and definitely something we should dig into later. So, Robin, I wanted to pick up, you talked about 2 things there, right? Like one was this increasing the pace of innovation, and the other is then being able to attract the right talent. And I guess what's interesting about both of those is like, how do you measure the success that comes out of that? Because often these transformations are really expensive, and you get people talking about a return on investment. And I think neither of those in the short term is easy to see that return on investment necessarily. So how do you go about that that challenge of saying, well, this is worth the investment for the long term, and counteracting that with showing any short-term wins?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think you have to paint a bold vision of what kind of digital transformation achieve. Be it saving time for science or accelerating or productivity. But then it's all about. That's you simply. The labs are so diverse. I think that's one of the exciting parts, actually, and challenges of early science labs, that it's so diverse. So how do you recuperate that bold? How do you chop it up into manageable chunks and report back? So we've been high up on, before we start any investment, we do a short business case. Get the product owners aligned from day one, and we report back on the actual benefits once it's delivered, and we follow up on that as well. That's quite tedious, but we believe it's the key to success, to report back. So we have a long list of projects and deliverables, and for each deliverable we've gone back and asked, okay, so how has this improved your particular lab workflows or whatever the goals have been?
And will those success measures often be something that you can see a result on within the first 6 months, the first year? What are the timeframes normally?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's part of the nice thing in a way in the labs, because digitization has only been a key topic the past couple of years, in my opinion. So there are quite many low-hanging fruits, and with that you see an instant uplift. I mean, if you're altering a particular workflow and automating it, it's an instant result. So yes, most of the benefits can be measured and can be reported on. Being achieved within a couple of months after delivery. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Andy, how do you find this when you're working with companies? What are they often looking for, and that bold vision versus those kind of short-term wins?
Yeah, what we try in our technical development space is we are working along use cases. We are not focused on enablement technologies. So that means we are not starting and say, okay, let's implement a data lake and let's later look what is the use case for this. We say, for example, okay, we have the need of in silico prediction of stability data. And then we work along the line what we need to implement this. And I think Robin make a important point here. It's you call it product owner. And I think this is one of the success criteria. To say, okay, go away from a project lead or a project manager. Go to people, they own this. They are self-enabled, and then you see more and more the benefits are coming because you're moving a little bit away from the old structure. And we know there is, in the most cases, not an immediately value. So if you start moving something to the cloud or work with your data, this took a while, right? There are quick wins, absolutely, where we implement small apps to have in few weeks a business value. It's totally easy in a non-GMP space. Comes a little more complicated in GMP space. But I think we need both.
Yeah, you have to show the benefit early if you want to kind of get people bought into that longer term vision. And then let's go on to this other point then, Robin, because I think it's such an interesting one. This link you made between digital transformation and kind of having cutting edge labs and then attracting the right talent. And how have you seen that play out? And what can you crystallize that thought a bit more for us?
Yeah, I can't. Obviously we have great people here, so I can't actually comment on the. I think that takes years and years, right, before you have a really attractive lab spaces where it's an attractive workplace to get to work. The youngsters that are growing up now, how do they recognize the AstraZeneca brand and that? All of that. That's not something that within a month suddenly we make a big splash, right? It takes time. What we have seen no doubt many companies do this in pulse scores or customer satisfaction scores. From purely a lab perspective, the numbers are going up, which is, of course, very positive to see. So over time, we hope that will obviously translate into actually attracting the right talents. But it's hard to say anything measurable at this point in time.
No, that makes sense. So let's instead, because I think we started to talk about this, right? Like, talked about why bother and talked about how, there are huge benefits to be had, and if someone holds that vision and can deliver on that vision, it's a really remarkable thing. And I think then we started talking about these short-term wins as well, and maybe we can broaden the question out to say, like, what's the difference between the people that do this really successfully, this kind of transformative piece, and those that maybe start or struggle to even get going on it? And I don't know if Andy, you could kick us off there.
Yeah, this is always a great question. I think I see the biggest benefit when we starting to work more agile. Move away from traditional project plans, collecting requirements again and again and don't understand what we need. Break it more down to management pieces and say, okay, let's see what we can achieve in 3 months and control our strategy here and really adjust this. And don't follow this hard 5-year plan where we say, okay, this is written in stone, no choice, implement this and have the cycles and control ourselves and challenge ourselves. And it's a little bit a culture topic, because challenge people is not so easy in a good way to raise the right questions, and also have the open mindset to say, okay, how we can enable the people to make their own decisions. So you mentioned this, Robin, find talents or great talents is not so easy. So it means we spend also some time for training our people. And we have a journey, we call this loop journey, where we enable self-enabled teams. They make their own decision on the lowest level. And there we see now the fruits, when not everything goes to a management level. And in this case, I see we are faster and faster, and also we bring more solutions what really help the lab. And it's not only the vision of a manager. And if you have the people more and more in the project and say, okay, you are the product owner, but you are sitting in the lab, not in a silo in an IT department. We see the applications got better, more user-centric. And I think this is the only good thing of the Corona crisis. We understand there are things now possible where we say before, this cannot be done from home or from remote. And we see there's more and more need now coming to say, okay, can I release my sample from home? And in good old times, we say, oh no, you need a batch record and you have a folder and so on. And we're moving forward and forward to digitalize more small pieces to enable a more attractive workspace here. And find more your work-life balance. And this make us more attractive as a company, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. And Robin, can I ask the same question to you? Like, what have you seen work well, and where have you seen it struggle?
Yeah, just to hook into what Andreas was saying, completely agree with the more agile approach. Firstly, so in AstraZeneca, we've actually just set up what we call a digital lab platform team. So this is an agile team that both run and build new solutions. I think the other key part that we mentioned is already product owners, and we have a concept called digital champions in the business. These are enthusiastic lab scientists who want to make an impact, who want to make change for the better. So globally, we have around 100 digital champions, and I think that for me is a key thing I would like I think that's the biggest hurdle, I guess, from a cultural perspective, is how do you, from within a lab, drive a change? I mean, IT can't do that for that. We can analyze and we can propose and but if it doesn't come from within the labs, then I think that's a risk and a missed opportunity, I think. So driving that from within labs via digital champions is what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So how do you keep those digital champions engaged? Like, what is it that keeps them tied in and driving that kind of change?
Yeah, so it's two ways we see it. So one is from the platform team that I just mentioned. These champions, they basically provide input into the backlog of ideas that come into this team. We can't speak to the 1,500 lab scientists worldwide on a daily basis, right? So these are the spokesperson, you could say, for the people on the ground. So that's one way. The other way back is, of course, when we deliver new stuff, the champions say, "Oh, great! Now it's delivered. How do I disseminate this into the wider organization?" So that's how we keep the champions engaged, and we have frequent, meetups. Obviously now all predominantly virtual, unfortunately. But and just to Andreas's point there, I think if there's one thing that obviously the pandemic has taught us is how reliant we still are on physical presence in the labs. And I think that is tripping us up, quite frankly, that we need to find ways to de-densify, to maybe run more shifts and then spread it out, basically. And we quickly realized here's a massive opportunity to help with digital tools, remote technologies, etc., to make a real impact. Even cobots now and almost like humanoids that we're testing in the labs and mimicking what scientists actually do. I think we will see an acceleration of those types of technologies in the coming years.
Yeah, and so I think that's an interesting thing. Like, has the pandemic sped up the pull on your team, Robin, and
absolutely,
the same
yes.
for you? And that the main driver there has been the number of people working from home, and therefore how do we keep the labs going given people can't come in?
Yes, it's on an individual level, but also on a collaboration aspect. So if my colleague but previously we were meeting in a particular lab or a room, and that doesn't happen now. So how do I communicate? How do I know? How do I figure out what my neighbor is doing? And the collaboration aspect, how do we share the data between teams? So it's not just me and my work and me performing my work somewhere else, but it's actually also the collaboration aspects. How do we store our data? How do we get away from the Friday ELN write-up? Problem. How do we do tech transfer? All of those questions are amplified, I think, through the pandemic. So yes, absolutely, demand is going through the roof on all those aspects. So that's how we've formed our focus areas, our three focus areas. One is around what we tend to call our flexible lab footprint. So lab spaces at a premium. How can we maximize every square inch across all of our R&D sites? How can we maximize the assets in there and how they're being utilized? So that's one aspect. The other one is the data side, of course. Automate the instrument data capture and using standards to safeguard the ability to reuse. And then the final point is our human experience, basically. How can we reduce frustration and automate tedious tasks for our scientists? So those are our three focus areas going forward.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And Andy, maybe the same thing for you. What have you seen the drives been and changed over the pandemic, and has that been a force for good in some ways?
Yeah, I think it starts with very small things where we get a little bit away from writing long emails, using more chat and chats. Also this video conferences, because now you have to challenge people sitting at home, some were sitting in the lab, and we realized this is not efficient to write some emails and wait one day. So you need a different collaboration space. And it starts a few years before, when our global IT departments decide to open some tools for outside use. So before, everything in Roche was behind a firewall. It was not possible to work remote without a VPN connection. And we see now more and more tools popping up. And with this, the people in the laboratory realize, oh yes, this is possible. And what make really sense for me to do on-site and what I can do from home, maybe writing some scientific documents, BLAs, INDs, or reading SOPs, why I drive 50 kilometers to a company or to a site to read a SOP. And this was for us the first mindset shift where the people realize there is not a white or a black. There is always a little bit gray in the middle, right? So where we must collaborate, and then we focused more on how we can share our data or bring it to a digital way, because when you sit at home, you have no access to paper-based documentation. So it means everything is better as having paper. It's sometimes paper on glass. It's not digitalization, it's only paper on glass, but this helps to do something from home. You can sign these documents, and we have implemented very easy things, for example, using DocuSign to sign some reports. It's not rocket science, but we have not the need before because the people signed on paper. They are all sitting on site. And we see the small steps, and the small steps comes also to the mindset where now the ideas get bigger and bigger. How I can control an instrument from home, what alarms I need, what is happening around in my lab. Maybe you see this with a camera, and we're talking about some new stuff like augmented reality. So your group leader sitting at home, some people are in the lab and they will show a problem. And now maybe with augmented reality, you can visualize what's happened on your device. And so I think there are many, many baby steps, but we see now this is growing faster and faster because we learned in the 2 last years really how we can accelerate things.
Yeah.
And this is for me the transforming part.
Yeah. And okay, so I want to go back to something. So you both talked about this agile approach, and that it's something that at Automata we've always been very fixed on and focused on. So, but I want to play devil's advocate here a little bit. And this was something we talked about before, Andy, when we were preparing for this session. I think like, is there ever a limitation of iterative change? Like, can iterative change truly deliver what we want to, or do you have to start thinking about destructive change? You have to go for something where it is a major overhaul, and therefore it can't be something that does deliver value incrementally. And have you guys seen that push and pull where actually you're limited by the concept of being agile and delivering iterative change? I'd love to, Robin, if you want to start off on that.
Yeah, sure. Just to be clear, I think in terms of your delivery approach, you can still do that in iteration, even though, well, this is my opinion at least, although the change itself is transformational, but you can still do it in bite-sized chunks, so to speak. But I think you're right, and the typical agile, let's put it on a backlog and we'll get it prioritized and just run with it. Some things are just a bit more complex. To take an example, if you were to harmonize the data workflows with regards to mass specs globally, right? I'm mentioning this because we're just going through this. That is not an easy one to drive because of the, I would say, local or site-based approach that at least we've had for many, many years. So people are using instruments, they're using them in different ways. Their workflows are a bit different across the different sites globally. The tools that they use to analyze the data is a bit different. So to then say, okay, we're going to make your life a lot better. We're going to automate everything here. And it's more cost effective. It's going to help you long term. but it's going to mean a big change for you. That simply, needs a bit of more of a change focused effort.
Yeah.
So that's my view. But then you can still, okay, once we've all decided this is what the workflow is going to look like, this is what it means architecturally, this is how this what this means from your local sort of blueprint and where you're now and where you're going to, that you can still deliver in sort of iterations, the actual change.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Andy, it would be great to get your view. I know we talked about this before.
Yeah, I think what is sometimes missing, this is the big picture, right? So you can do small steps, but you need a clear goal. And so we started to draw a big picture, what we want to achieve in 5 years, for example. And now we are selecting the right projects. And we have also learned a little bit with the agile. Sometimes agile not fits well in a pharmaceutical company. And now we work more or less to say, okay, let's deliver a MVP, a minimal viable product. To release every 2 weeks is sometimes senseless because there is no business value. You need a tool or an application what bring a real business value. And this is our MVP. This is our lessons learned to say, okay, deliver this MVPs and then we have this backlog and let's implement new functionalities, but don't do it in the old-fashioned way where we need 5 years for a rollout. Because we take everything into account, every instrument, every workflow, everything must be perfect. And at the end, we realize 5 years later, everything has changed in the laboratory. And this is not needed anymore.
Yeah, it makes sense. And so maybe I can dig into that point a bit more. That question, you said there are points in pharmaceutical companies where agile breaks down. It doesn't add business value. What are examples? What are you picturing when you're saying that?
Yeah, for example, now we are rolling out a LIMS on 18 sites. And this needs more or less a clear project plan because the sites must prepare the resources. You have a global project team. So the LIMS himself can be set up a little bit more agile, but the rollout must be done from my perspective in a more traditional way. You can change a little bit, but there is no benefit to do it agile. So it means when you build a house, you can do it something in an agile way, but is there real a benefit if you change your windows every 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Really, right? So you can do this, but I think you must always figure out where the agile model brings a business value.
Yeah, it makes sense. So let's now talk about, we've talked about these big transformation pieces, and Robin, I think you're absolutely right that you can deliver them iteratively. But I know that for a lot of companies that maybe feel a bit behind, like they're starting now and there's a lot that they need to put in place, it can feel a little bit daunting that, I actually need to spend a year getting the fundamentals, the basics in place that aren't going to add very much value before I can even start adding those use cases, Andy, that you talked about, and start adding that value. What would your advice be to someone that's in that position where they're looking and they're going, where do I start?
So I liked Andreas' pitch there. If I look at AstraZeneca, we are, the data angle and the artificial intelligence, machine learning, is so central to our strategy nowadays. But then you take it back to the labs and say, well, how does that big vision translate to our particular lab space? And we see we see a gap there. So how do you paint that picture? And I don't know how the different companies, I think that's the trick. You have your company goals somewhere, hopefully, and your lab is contributing to to those goals in some shape or form. And if you've just addressed the basics, that's great. And you need to be vocal about that. How has that made an impact? you're on a journey here, but what is missing in the next wave of that journey, and link it back to your company goals. I mean, it sounds simple, and that's how we do it. But I like Andreas's view is you need to paint that lab of the future, or whatever you want to call it, and pull out some themes that are missing. And our 3 themes I already mentioned, and I'm sure Andreas has a particular view on their themes as well. And then it goes into the business of, well, what is the gap, and what does your financial cycle look like, and raising business cases and all the rest of it. But I think you've got to start with that and get good sponsorship for that piece of work. Well, let's paint a picture of what the lab of the future means for us. What are some of the building blocks that we need apart from the foundational components? Who's behind those? Again, it can't be just an IT push. That needs to be, some serious sponsorship from high up. Do you have some enthusiastic senior members that want to champion some of those ideas? Yeah, and then you get going.
Yeah, and Andy, what about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's totally important, Robin, what you said before, the link to the company goals. Sometimes this is a little bit overlooked because we have all goals, right? And one of the goals from Roche is bring medicines faster to patients. And now we start to analyze what takes so long to bring a new a new drug to the market. Clear, there are clinical studies and so on, but there are also some internal processes if you're writing some documents for health authorities. So sometimes this took years, right? And this is a good point where you say, okay, how we can accelerate this and what is the technical solution? This brings us closer to our company goal. And in this case, we collected a few years before 150 use cases from the whole organization where the people feel this can accelerate our market goal here. And then we say, okay, we cannot deliver 150 or 40, not 100 use cases, but we can start with the 3 most impactful. And this was the goal. And then in this case, we start with 3 use cases and see, okay, now let's build what we need for the future. And don't focus too much on return of invest, because this is a transforming piece. And it means there is not a clear return on invest in few months. So you can imagine if you do something now, we're moving to the cloud. Cloud have huge opportunities, but also some challenges. And we go a little bit back and forth. And we implement along this our agile model. This was not done before. This comes with these use cases. We enable the business owner and we let it grow from there now and say, okay, we learn what is working well and what is not working well here. And we also see the need to have, you can imagine in a GMP space, you need continuous improvements. But especially in a non-GMP space, we need also radical or disruptive innovations, where you see, let it do in a complete different way. Let's try it. And this is the good thing on our R&D space. There are always going things wrong, right? We have no molecules, they come not to the market. So our people knows to handle this mistakes or errors. This is not new for R&D space. And I think this is a great starting point to start in R&D space, because you have a little bit more freedom as a classical commercial space. This is not so cool if you batch running not well in a commercial space. And there is only a little space for continuous improvement, but not for this disruptive innovation sometimes.
Yeah. And Robin, I want to come back to, so you talked about those three like pillars of change that you guys are focusing on, right? And I think what's interesting, there's a question that we'll come to obviously later about automation in there, and it's a topic very close to my heart. So let's go there very quickly. And of course, it's a big thing for Roche as well. Like, I thought the thing that was so interesting in the 3 points that you laid out, Robin, was how central automation is to that digital transformation, and the two almost going hand in hand, which is something we see quite a lot. But do you think that is do you see that as, when you're laying that vision of the smart lab of the future, however you want to do that, is automation as central to that as the digital transformation side of things? And how involved do you get in that side?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think there's two things here. One is, how do we assist the science, and particularly in the early science, it is about augmenting and do better and more. That's one aspect, and I think automation absolutely will start to help more in that space. But I think where it has a more prominent play is where you can, you have clear defined workflows, and there is a repetitive pattern, and it's just mundane tasks you're automating, where it can either be software automation or robotics, or a combination of both. Absolutely. But I think the first one, people tend to, particularly people who are new to the industry, and particularly in the early science space, that there is a belief that you can automate everything. And it's like, well, no, that's not how science works. I mean, most of the experiments do not turn out the way you anticipated them, right? That's why that's what we're here to support. So that is really difficult, and I think we believe that you need to have that agility in the lab, and just by automating, have an ambition to automate everything, you're going to miss that point. So I think you need to have that augmentation part and the relentless and ruthless automation. You need to have them side by side, because it doesn't always fit.
And almost at different stages there you're talking about, right? Like that very early stage, the flexibility you're talking about. Right now, it feels like there isn't much to handle that and to replicate what a person can do, but later on, as you get into the high throughput screening, I guess, side of things, there it starts to become very, very real and prominent.
Yeah. And just to add on your point, I think from a skill set and how we, so what we currently see in AstraZeneca is sort of the robotic side of things. There are, I would say, pockets of mature groups. HTS you mentioned already, but there are others, of course. I think our challenge is, and obviously in the IT department, we're high on, the software side of it. But I think the marrying the two together is still a bit of a challenge for us, and I think that the two need to start to converge more. So what we tend to see is a lot of software development that goes on in those pockets, and that is not always
to try to integrate that into the rest of the system.
Exactly. Yeah. Because you can treat those automation platforms as their own little island, but lo and behold, they want to start to integrate with whatever the LIMS or the ELNs or and that's where the challenge then becomes real. So I think that's a bit of it. We haven't solved that. It's a skills challenge, and where do you put those skill types, etc. So I agree with you. It's a highly interesting area.
Yeah, that's great. And Andy, what about you?
Yeah, I think automation have so many flavors, right? So for one, automation is only robotics. Other one says, okay, if you transfer analyzes results from a device to a LIMS, it's also automation. And I think sometimes automation brings immediately value, because if you move values from a device to a LIMS, you solve your GMP problem, your data integrity problem, you save time for the analyst. But at the other hand, you need a maintenance. Sometimes this is a little bit overlooked. Where is the right balance? If Robin says this before, if you automate everything, maybe this is more expensive as do some small steps manually. But at the other hand, with the automation, there comes for me a very important point, the second use of data. So sometimes our data are not accessible. We have not always fair data. And when I talk with the management, with the senior management, they ask me why we have not machine learning implement and artificial intelligence. We need this. And I say, hey guys, we're working with Excel sheets in the laboratory, in a non-GMP space. There is a need for a foundation before.
Yeah, no.
Where you collect data, automate something, and then we can look for the more high sophisticated stuff. And I think the second use of the data comes more and more important. And this is what you not see with the first integration or automation step. That what is possible in the future if you have the algorithm to do some in silico prediction of something or do automatic reporting or what else. There are so many use cases.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. Okay, so I think, and the big topic that we haven't talked about, the kind of elephant in the room, is going to be the change management side of things, right? And I think, Robin, you've already alluded to this and the importance of it with those champions that you talked about. But yeah, I'm going to open that up as a topic and see where it takes us, really. Like, how do you guys find that, and how do you deal with it?
It is a real. I can go first. I mean, it all sounds dandy and self-explanatory. Yeah, you just find a product owner. We have some digital champions worldwide, and off you go. But that is, to maintain that list of champions, to find the right champions. We have a governance group as well who we put in charge of maintaining that list. That needs constant attention. That you have the right mix of people from. As Andreas, also from a global company, we have global presence, we have different sites, we have different functions. So how do you get a cross-cut that sort of hits all aspects of sites, functions, disciplines, etc., late stage, early stage, all those, that is really, really challenging. I think if you show value and you have this northern star somewhere of, hey, this is what we're trying to achieve with a vision. If you have some tangible benefits that you can show early, then I'm convinced that every lab you'll find enthusiastic people. It's just that they are likely not there. They haven't been recruited with that mindset, or with the digitization in the labs, as I said, is just starting, right? So they have not been there recruited for that purpose. But that doesn't mean that there are not people interested to improve. On the contrary, I think they are. They just need to be shown a bit along the way. It's like, okay, how do you do that? And how can I help? But it does require a lot of effort. I think the other big thing is what I mentioned earlier, once it's about actual change and changing ways of working, to have that senior sponsorship is critical, because sometimes you need to show with a complete hand we're going left or we're going right. There is no option any longer. So, and that's only, needs to come from the top, and you have to have that support. Even though you might have champions, it needs that seniority to it.
It has to kind of have both sides, right? Like, we are going in this direction, and this is why. And this is how we're going to compel everyone that this is good and beneficial.
But it's for me, it's been. I mean, we've all seen the examples of IT projects where we're going to replace System X with System Y, and that simply won't work in a lab environment. It's too diverse, too complex to do that. So.
So more often it's a more iterative change. Again, does this come back to this idea of like that fundamental change is very hard very hard, or is that more in the messaging are you talking about?
It's more the product ownership and the sponsorship and the business angle to it, and we all try that often in any of the IT projects, but in reality it gets missed now and then, and it just becomes a push, and that simply won't work in your lab environments. So
Yeah. And Andy, how do you guys tackle this? Because so often you won't even have the benefit of being within that company before, like you're the in some sense, it's like the outsider coming in and implementing change, which I imagine makes this even tougher.
Yeah, I think for all these huge companies, it's really a challenge. It's not so easy. I think there are small pieces what we try out. We have a similar concept. We call it digital ambassadors. But now what we realize, we accept also the business embedded IT. It means before we try everything, put it out from the business and say, this is our global IT or our IT functions. And then that's coming up, what Robin told here, they lose a little bit the lab focus because they don't understand what we do. And so we are now looking to implement, in Gartner terms, it's called fusion teams, where we have the product owner in the business. But you must work with global functions for validation stuff, for IT stuff, for security, and so on. But this is our lessons learned. If the need comes from the business, the acceptance in the lab is much more higher. As someone in a tower from the IT decides we implement a new LIMS without the business need here to see. And this is one part, but we also try to train people to say, okay, what do you need to grow a little bit in your digital space? And also when we hire new people, we're looking more and more to make the people aware or ask the question, do you like to work with digital tools? Will help us to grow more in this? Because we see this in the next years, this cannot be avoided to move everything from paper to digital. And I think you need new people with the willingness factor. But on the other hand, train your organization. We have really good scientists and we don't want to lose them and help them a little bit to find the way in the new digital area, right?
Yeah, makes complete sense. And I think one thing that we've always seen, and I'm interested how this has played out for you, is sometimes there can be a change, right? And that is the right thing for the business because it's like a pocket of people over here are going to get loads of benefit from it, but the pocket of people that you're asking to change are somewhere else in the business. They're the people that are now going to have to do an extra process or whatever, and those changes are so much more challenging because they don't see the benefit, and the best changes that I've ever seen is if you want that benefit over here, you have to make sure that change is beneficial for the people who you're asking to change, right? And I'm interested whether you guys have successfully done change where that isn't the case, or whether that comes into your thinking when you're trying to create a change. How do we make this beneficial for the people that we're asking to change, as well as whoever the recipient of that benefit is? That question makes sense.
it does make sense. It is a complex one, though. I have one example where I think you're absolutely right, and we've actually made it our business to ensure that. So the example I have is metadata, right? So we're collecting a whole lot of data from experiments. How do you add metadata to it? Well, ideally, automatically when it's as early as possible. So the machine itself might have some metadata, the file might have some metadata, but at some point you're going to ask a scientist to enter some data. If that scientist is not getting any benefit from them, well, forget it. It's not going to happen. We can shout all day long. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. Completely. It's funny you bring up metadata. I think it's exactly the example I was thinking as well. It's the most common example of this, right?
So we've opted to, well, that's never going to work. We've tried this so many times, not just in the lab space, I would argue, all over the place. So you need to find those elements of interesting metadata that particular scientist or that group of scientists is interested in as well, and that you can ask for. but more than that, just not going to. Just give up the idea. It's just not going to work. So I completely agree with you. You can't. In these environments, you can't drive that from the top and say, "Hey, you must enter this."
It just
unless you're sort of in the regulated space, and maybe then you have a chance of getting people to mandate things that they actually are not seeing any benefit.
Yeah.
But in the early science space, it's not going to work.
Yeah. Hey, Mark, good to see you.
It's just your cue said there's 10 minutes left of the session. Didn't want to interrupt seems like the conversation's in full flow there, but. Just let you know we've got 10 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. Andy, I don't know if you want to talk about that change as well. And I don't know, you were nodding vigorously when we started talking about metadata. So maybe this is just the common place where this challenge comes up.
100% agree. Maybe there's a small key if you say, okay, if you enter the metadata, maybe you get a data transfer for this. But I think always the people in the lab looking, what is my benefit? 100% agree, Robin. So we see the similar thing.
Nice. Mark, is it worth us moving into the Q&A part?
Yeah. We had a couple of questions early on. Not sure if these questions have been answered as yet. But do you want me to read them out, or would you like to read them out and?
No, that's fine. I can take them, and we can start with the top one. It's got three likes. So the first question, and Robin, let's start with you on this one. What's your experience of ELN providers?
Well, unfortunately, we have a few. So I think that's our first comment. Through mergers, acquisitions, we've grown as a company, and hence we have a bit of a challenge, I would say. Currently, we have, to my knowledge, 4 different sort of ELN installations, if you wish, 2 different vendors, and I think if you just purely look from there's many different aspects on why that's not optimal, but I think that the main reason from a data perspective, I think we need, regardless of what platforms they're on and how long they've existed, I think our major challenge going forward is how do you make them more workflow aligned, and how can we ensure, back to the previous discussion around metadata, how can we get more value out of the data? We and I'm sure we're not unique, but searching the ELNs and finding the correct data is a real challenge. So. Yeah, I don't know if the Q&A was more about particular comments on vendors, but I'm not gonna do that.
No, I think that's fair. You don't need to bring your dirty laundry up here. That's and Andy, do you guys interact a lot with other ELN providers, and how have you found that process?
Yeah, it's totally similar. My personal feeling is we have every ELN on the market implemented in Roche, because with 100,000 people, there is enough space. But especially in the R&D space where I'm working is now we are heavily implementing BenchLink, to be honest. We have done an evaluation, and what we are missing with few other providers is there are also other good providers on the market, no question. But I think we are looking for more capabilities. So in the good old times, it was clear defined, a LIMS handle tests, and the ELN handle experiments, and the MES handles batches, and the SAP handles SAP. But now you see more and more vendors create more and more capabilities, maybe for sample management, for material management. And I think this is the important thing for us now, how we can replace our homegrown solutions, because with our old ELN, we have a homegrown material management, a homegrown data warehouse, a homegrown sample management. And I think the time is over to do this software development in-house, because this is not a big innovation. So it means now we choose a vendor where we see there are the right capabilities. And also we are looking for vendors where we have a software as a service to get rid of. Yeah.
Why the software as a service bit?
Because it's much faster to implement, especially in the R&D space.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, nice. And why don't we move on to the next question then, which is how do you measure the effectiveness of an automated protocol? Is that something that you do in human hours saved, or in increased sample throughput, or some other metric? So I think this comes back to that question we were talking about, and what we were talking about a bit earlier, Robin. So maybe I'll start with you, and we can continue that discussion of those two different environments, that like early stage benefit versus the late stage more lockdown.
Yeah, sorry, I'm misreading the question, but it's are there any other metrics? So the question is more on the metrics. What metrics do we use to?
Exactly.
Yeah, so absolutely, time savings is a big one for us. Whether you translate that to FTEs or dollar figures, it depends on your audience. I think the obvious then next question is, well, what are the scientists going to do with that extra time? And that's the follow-up question, which you're probably going to get. So you need to be clear on that. So if I've saved 5 hours or 10 hours for a scientist, what is he going to do with it? Hopefully something productive. But you need to know your business to answer that question in the right way. I think some other metrics can include, the quality side of things. So by automating, removing manual steps and human, steps, are you less likely to introduce errors? Data accessibility is a high one for us. So does the user have confidence in the data that you can make more accessible? So it's hopefully that gives some sort of answer to what kind of metrics we're sort of measuring.
Andy, what about you?
Yeah, we have the same challenge, and we measure this in a little bit a different way. We measure only the output here to say with the same amount of people, we can handle more molecules at the same time. Because it's the same as Robin told before, when you get 5 hours for free, what you do with these hours, it means always you must reduce FTEs, right? Because you are now saving something. But we are also measuring the user satisfaction. This is totally important for us. We do some surveys to say, okay, is there really a benefit in this, what we do from the user centricity perspective? If the user says, yes, it makes my life more easy, I love to go to work, and so on. Not always this hard facts and also these soft facts, right?
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Sure. I'm aware we're at time, so Mark, should I hand back to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're perfectly timed, actually. Absolutely perfect. So thank you very much. That brings the first session to a close. So to the audience, I hope you found it useful, and you've got some tips that you can take back to the office. Just special thanks to Nick, to Andy, and to Robin.